Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the Institute for Personal Development, Kriya Yoga Ashram, where total consciousness is the new frontier.
Kriya Yoga is union of the individual with the divine. Join us as we explore the practices to initiate this process.
Good morning. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. Let's Talk Consciousness. I am your hostess, Lisa Winton, and with me is Kenny Toy, also known as Swami Jayananda, founder of the Institute for Personal Development, located here in Hampton, New Hampshire. Good morning, Swami. Thank you for being here today. How are you?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good today. How about you?
I'm doing pretty good today. Thanks for asking. And we want to thank you all for tuning in. So today on the Voice of Yoga, we'll be talking about fidelity to the invisible and intangible, sustaining infinite. In this show, we will be exploring the experience of stepping off the material plane and standing in the truth of being. Listen as we explain what it will take to put your trust in the nothingness of spirit. As C.S. Lewis said, aim at heaven and you will get earth thrown in. Aim at earth and you get neither. Trust in spirit to reveal the perfection of being. Welcome to the Voice of Yoga. We are talking consciousness. And join the Kriya Yoga Spiritual Advance. Get the light in your soul and live beyond the finite. So, Swami, we were talking the other day about a verse in the Bible talking about showing and trusting. And I was wondering if you could review that with our listeners and tell us why it's so important.
Yeah, that verse that you're talking about where it says, man says, show and I will trust, and God says, trust and I will show. We did try and research that, and it has been attributed to, I think it was Psalm 126, and also some people make reference to Psalm 118, but none of the translations of the Bible that we used were we able to find that. Independent of where it comes from, I think it's a really good statement for how we approach our lives and this whole thing of developing what is called faith. Because if we are relying on the testimony of our senses, which is what the human typically does, and show and then I will trust, it doesn't work on the spirit plane, because the main reason I think is because we're trying to trust something that is invisible and intangible. It cannot be shown. It can't be proven. As we have said in other shows, it's frequency free. There's no way of detecting its presence other than the demonstration of attention that we could have for that. Because the one benefit that we're starting to find about this divine principle is that it holds the template for perfect creation.
Well, here's what I'm thinking is that man says, show and I will trust, but I'm willing to bet that there's a lot of people who don't even realize that that's what they're doing, is that they're using God as this being that's available for their bidding. And so I think we have to have an awareness if that's indeed what it is that we're doing.
Yeah, and I think you're 100% right. I mean, that's what a lot of us are doing, is that we're trying to use God as some sort of commodity to enrich our human experience, to try and get more of the pleasures and the profits out of the world. And of course, what we're finding is that it doesn't work like that at all. But this whole thing of faith, and faith in this model is belief in truth. And as we have been saying all along, that belief is what gives thought the power of intention. And what I don't think a lot of us understand is that we're starting out with a belief in the testimony of our senses. We're starting out with a belief in what we think is real. And our belief in the testimony of our senses is what perpetuates its existence. Faith is belief in truth. And that's the whole thing of this divine principle that I think we're going to try and maybe unbox a little bit here.
Well, I think what you maybe should do is just define what you mean by truth. And we're talking truth with a capital T, because you may have some listeners out there that may not know what we mean by that.
Yeah, well, first of all, to begin with, truth is interchangeable with terms like God. Truth is interchangeable with terms like divine principle. That truth is an understanding of the perfection of being. Truth is an understanding that the underpinnings of all life is spirit. And this spirit is eternal and unchanging, and it is whole, complete, harmonious. But the most important thing for us to understand is that it doesn't report in our lower mind, in our five-sense mind, that works on contrast and it works on duality, which is really a reality that is apart from this unified state. So to understand the divine principle or to understand truth, we're really trying to understand something that is invisible and intangible.
So this should be a good place to start defining what the divine principle is?
Yeah, that is basically the divine principle is the creative principle of the divine creation or the perfection of being, the reality created by God and under divine law, the law of love, life, harmony, and it demonstrates absolute peace.
All right, so you just said a few minutes ago that we were going to unbox the divine principle. So let's get started with that.
Yeah, I think a good way maybe to start out with is starting out maybe with a series of questions, such as, is there a parallel universe to this world that we live in? And my answer to that would be yes, that underlying the testimony of our five senses is a reality that is whole, complete, unchanging, and eternal. And that would be the divine principle. And why don't we see it? Well, because it's whole and it's complete, there's no point of departure, and thus there's no contrast for our senses to perceive it. Now, we can't perceive it with our lower mind, but what we can do is we can start to usher in the faculty of the higher mind, which works in the absolute, which is different than the lower mind, which works on duality, which is basically fear and limitation. And it's a reality that is apart from this concept of God or unity or the one.
Well, what does it look like when somebody is operating out of fear and limitations? Just to bring it to our level of awareness.
Yeah, see, we start out living from the changing conditions of our personal mentality, which is basically individualized from the world mind, which means that we have a belief in duality. We have a belief in two powers, and we believe that this is real. And like I said earlier, our belief in it perpetuates it because this belief in a reality that is apart from unity or wholeness or the principle of the divine is all the power that it has. It comes from our belief. Whereas divine mind or the realm of spirit or unity consciousness is a belief in one power, but it is the only power in this universe. Everything else is a reflection of divine law. And so what does it look like when we're living out from this world mind is that we're reactive, we're emotional, and we're controlled by the testimony of our five senses. And we don't realize it, but we're really in more of a hypnotic state because we have a belief in a reality apart from this concept of God or unity or a false sense of existence. And in order for us to really awaken from this, we must overcome the world mind, which means that we have to move beyond using what is visible and tangible for validation. We have to move even beyond what's invisible and tangible for validation. Because we're reacting to things as if we're in danger, when, in fact, if you are an eternal spiritual being, you are never in a life-threatening situation. And so as we start to graduate from relying on the testimony of our senses and living out from the world or duality, which is fear and limitation, and we start to realign ourselves or awaken to the simple fact that we are spirit, that we are an eternal spiritual being. That gives you a whole different perspective of yourself or your identity. In fact, you transcend the changing conditions of a personal sense of self, and now you start to move into a more impersonal, spiritual sense of selfhood, which means that you are more anchored in the changeless state of being. You are more anchored in a part of reality that is unchanging, and it is way more reliable because it's eternal.
Well, it sounds like that is a challenge for a lot of us to live our lives like that and still live in this world, in this physical world. So, how do we go about doing that?
Yeah, and to answer your question, it all happens with, instead of drawing off of the outside world for validation, for whatever it is that we are using to produce a feeling that we're okay, you align yourself with a source of energy that is recognized in your consciousness, in your mind. And it's invisible, it's intangible, but it is the void or the nothing out of which everything comes. And now your exchange of energy is not that you're drawing off of the outside world. You're actually supported internally. And I like what the Bible tells us, to seek ye first the kingdom of heaven. And where is it that we find this kingdom of heaven? But within our own being, that we find this source of sustenance that is invisible, intangible, inexhaustible, and eternal. And now we are giving out. Rather than siphoning off and drawing in, we are in a completely different relationship with our environment, what seems to surround us. And by giving out, there is absolutely no need for return. So in other words, we no longer have expectations or placing conditions on what we're doing because there's fear. For a lot of us, we do things, but we expect something in return. Even, say, for example, in our relationships. I will love you, but I expect you to love me, kind of a thing. But when you have this primary relationship with the divine, now there's nothing threatening about anything in the outside world because you're eternal.
Well, I think that's a great place to pause to hear a word from our sponsors. So listeners, we will be back with you in just a few moments.
Kriya Yoga Theory 2 is a unique and revolutionary practice and forum designed to facilitate the growth process in human development. Apotheosis is a real experience and has an evidence procedure. You cannot lead someone to permanent change by doing for them what they must do themselves. Personal accountability and responsibility are the foundation of Kriya Yoga Theory 2. You must be engaged and devoted. Prana power brings virtue to overcome fear, wisdom to overcome ignorance, purpose to overcome selfishness, enthusiasm to overcome laziness. Kriya Yoga is a path of action, knowledge, and devotion. These sessions are a celestial positioning system to guide the individual into union with the divine. For more information or to sign up for your next session online, go to www.ipdtransform.com. Namaste.
Welcome back. For those of you just joining us, you are listening to The Voice of Yoga, and we are talking consciousness. So, Swami, a few minutes ago, you had used the phrase the kingdom of heaven, and I'd like to kind of dig a little bit deeper into that because I believe that a good majority of the people really don't understand that the kingdom of heaven resides within themselves. I was wondering if maybe you could enlighten us a little bit more on that.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right there. I think a lot of us think that it's someplace that we go after we die, which if you accept yourself to be an eternal spiritual being, then there is no born and dying. There is no now and then. That everything is what's referred to as the eternal now. And like you say, the kingdom of heaven is within us. And it's not someplace that we have to go or someplace that we have to die to get to, but it is here now. And part of it is starting to understand that there is this parallel universe, that what Jesus said, that my kingdom is not of this world. And this world is the world that we live in, which is the testimony of our five senses. But we must overcome this world or our allegiance to the five senses and now start to align ourselves and acknowledge the presence of something that doesn't report in our five sense mind. And that's where this whole thing of faith comes in. We have to recognize that there is only one truth. And in the framework of exploring and practicing and experimenting, what does it look like, what we're talking about here, that how do you trust something that is invisible and intangible?
Yeah, that's a good point. So I was thinking about the title of the show, Beginning to Trust the Divine Principle, and I was reminded of that exercise that you do with another person, and you your back is to that person, and then you fold your arms over your chest, and then you're just going to fall backwards and trusting the fact that somebody's going to catch you before you hit the floor. So, and that reminded me that I think it's that type of anxiety that is maybe the reason why people don't trust in the divine principle, don't trust in God, because it means they have to give up so much, and there's really no safety net, and who's going to catch them, So I just thought that was an interesting thought that I had about that.
Yeah, and again, I think it's a completely different medium that we're working with, because we're trying to trust one another, and we're relying again on the testimony of our senses. What we're really not talking about is senseless optimism or just being stupid, or even, it's not a parlor game that when all of a sudden that you have this awakening of your spiritual identity, and there is a true knowing that nothing can ever happen to you because you are an eternal spiritual being. You will never be careless with your understanding of this principle. And it's the fidelity that we have to this divine law that will never let us down. And so our relationship with this divine principle and our trust in it enables us to demonstrate what the Bible says, to know the truth, and the truth will set you free. Now, again, this isn't hocus pocus, that your belief in spirit, your recognition of spirit must demonstrate. When it's demonstrating, you can basically say to the proud wave, no further, and it stops. But you have to believe and you have to trust in it first. That's the only catch that we have here. That's the difference between the human waiting to be shown, then they'll trust, whereas to unleash our spiritual prowess, we really need to trust first. And then you have to be clear that your concept of what spirit is truth. Because that's the tricky part, that we can have a belief in something that is invisible but tangible. We can think that we're spiritual. We can have the concept of truth. The shadow of truth, which is more of a mental construct, and again, it's another demonstration of the world mind and not the demonstration of divine mind. Because as we start to demonstrate divine mind, our recognition of divine mind, and as we start to live out from this perfection of being, it starts to externalize as changes in our reality that reflect the nature of the divine, the perfection of being. So in other words, if what we're doing does not have the power of divine law behind it, then chances are that we are not working with truth. We're in the shadow of truth.
And that's probably where most of us are operating from. So would you suggest that, and I think we've talked about this before, would you suggest that we should, like before we do anything, we should have God at the forefront before we do anything? Like almost kind of like what would Jesus do, but just kind of have that sense that God is with us in everything that we do?
Yeah, you're 100% right on that, but it's toe in the water here, because you want to make sure that, like I said, you have all your I's dotted and your T's crossed before you want to step out off of the boat. Before you want to try and walk on the Atlantic, you want to be able to know that what you're doing will demonstrate. And that's where you start to practice. You start to use this principle, and you work with it until you start to get better and better at it. And your recognition of the presence of this invisible, intangible source initially might almost seem like you're pretending. But in reality, if you are doing it correctly, it will start to almost immediately demonstrate, because you're acknowledging the divine principle, which is the only power in this universe. And once we start to really understand that there's a big difference between being individualized from the world mind and being individualized from divine mind.
Okay, so Swami, so how do we think differently? How can we make these changes?
Yeah, that's what we talk about, going from the lower mind to the higher mind, going from the testimony of our senses and living out from this perfection of being, living out from this parallel reality that doesn't seem to report in our senses. And in order to do this, we must overcome the world mind. We must overcome the testimony of our senses. And that's not easy to do, because it's a knee-jerk response that we're constantly being distracted by sensation. And the only way that we can do this is by the recognition of the divine mind, the recognition of the presence of omnipresence, the recognition of the presence of the omnipotence of one power. And in the framework of doing this, we're really starting to use karma as a force to help lift us out of the cycle of death and rebirth. We're starting to use desire, right? Because desire is a power, and it is a force that originates from love, divine love. But it is a belief in an attachment to something other than divine law or God. That law of attraction, what we are attracted to, is going to determine where we're going to wind up. And if we're attracted to things that are visible and tangible, then we will remain in the cycle of death and rebirth, because we are drawn to fear and limitation, duality. If we are attracted to things that are invisible but tangible, thoughts and energy, then again we are attracted to duality, something that is apart from this unity consciousness. But if we are attracted to this void or this nothing, if we are attracted to spirit, then we have a belief in one power. But it is desire. And the way that we do that is by basically acquiring a taste for this void or this nothing.
Well, I think this is a good place. We need to start closing down our program for today. So listeners, I invite you out there to visit our website. It's www.ipdtransform.com. And then once you're there on that website, about 3/4 of the way down on that homepage, you'll see Swami Says Recent Posts, and you'll see other Blog Talk Radio shows that you can click on for your continued learning experiences. And then also don't forget, on Wednesday night, we have a Facebook Live session that we do Wednesday at 5 p.m., and we don't want you to miss out for that. So, Swami, do you have any other final thoughts about today's program?
Well, I would like to encourage people to start trusting in the sustaining infinite and have a belief in the one power. And with that, I'll wish everybody a good day. Namaste.
And thank you for listening to our program, The Voice of Yoga. This is Lisa Winton, along with Swami Jayananda, signing off. Have a wonderful Kriya Yoga kind of day. Namaste.